The House will come to order. Members will be at their seats. The clerk has opened the roll, and you may record your presence. Please rise and give your attention to our House chaplain. Remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Representative Collins.
Shall we pray? Gracious God, as we pray, we ask that you draw near and remind us once again how good it is to be close to you. Come alongside our lawmakers today and this week so that their walk would fall in step with your own purpose. Provide them with encouragement when their work and their desire for progress seems frustrated and hopeless. Guide them with your counsel when they find themselves inclined to lead on impulse. And grant them confidence in your grace plan when they are confounded with uncertainty and hesitation. Show them the importance of patience when they face unyieldingness among their colleagues. And when on this journey, when their hearts become embittered, show us how to love as you have loved us. You are the strength of our hearts and our reward forever. We claim this promise and we stand on it to get us through. I pray this in Christ's name, amen. Get it.
Have all members had the opportunity to record the presence? The clerk will close the roll and record the attendance. Change of reference, House Bill 2025 was withdrawn from the Committee of the Whole, referred to the Committee of Fed and State. Messages from the Governor. The clerk will read.
Substitute for House Bill number 2049 has been signed. Approved March 11, 2021. Laura Kelly, Governor.
Messages from the Senate. The clerk will read.
Senate announced the appointment of Senator Wilburn to replace Senator Thompson as a conferee on Senate Bill 40, announcing passage of Senate Bill 50. Senate Bill number 50 by the Committee on Assessment and Taxation, an act concerning taxation relating to marketplace facilitators, requiring the collection and remittance for sales, compensating use, and transient guest taxes and prepaid wireless 9/11 fees made on platforms, removing click-through nexus provisions.
Speaker recognizes the Majority Leader for motion to accede.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Senate did not concur in the House amendments to Senate Bill 47. I move the House accede to the request of the Senate and that a conference committee be appointed.
You've heard the motion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. Motion passes. As conferees as part of the House, the Chair appoints Representatives Adam Smith, Mason, and Gardner. The Chair recognizes the Majority Leader for motion to resolve into the Committee of the Whole.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the House resolve itself into the Committee of the Whole for the purpose of considering those items under the heading of General Orders.
You've heard the motion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion carries. The chair appoints Representative Garber to chair the committee of the whole.
Good morning, body. We have 3 bills today. First item of business is Senate Bill 235. For the purposes of carrying Senate Bill 235, the chair recognizes Representative Tim Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There were no committee amendments.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise before the body today on behalf of Senate Bill 235. It's been recommended for passage by the House Committee on K-12 Education Budget. The bill was passed without amendment by the Senate on March 2nd, coming out of the federal and state committees. Senate Bill 235 is very brief and can be summed up in just one sentence. It requires all unified school districts in the state to provide a full-time, in-person attendance option for all students enrolled in kindergarten through grade 12. And this begins on March 12th for this year and for every year thereafter. The fiscal note for the Division of Budget: there is no fiscal effect on the state of Kansas and no effect on any of the state aid to school districts, none. In the Senate, hearing proponents representing the citizens and the President of the Senate testified for the bill, while representatives for some school districts, the Association of School Boards, the KNEA, and medical groups spoke or wrote in opposition. That was in both the House and Senate testimonies. Neutral testimony was received from the American Heart Association. A key part of this bill is the words on line 11 and 12, which state, provide a full-time, in-person attendance option. Option. No school will be simply able to close the doors and provide only remote learning. Now, the revisor's office testified that this does not affect short-term closures for specific emergencies such as a broken boiler or a snow day. It does advance the principle of limited government by requiring school districts levying taxes and providing services from a budget to safely provide in-person learning. Testimony from both hearings confirmed that most districts are already exercising this option, or they will be by the March 26th enactment time. So it has now been right at a year since I walked out of my classroom, about a year ago, for spring break. Since that time, things have never been normal in schools. It is time to bring back a normal school environment for our students, with an option for kids to be in school full-time. So with that, I will stand for questions.
Does anyone wish to speak to the bill? Chair recognizes Representative Wynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, and I'd like to thank you in advance for your attention because this is a key bill. I stand here in opposition of Senate Bill 235, and I will tell you and suggest to you reasons why I will ask you likewise to vote no. You will have representatives coming down, perhaps, there's a couple, who will say, as the previous speaker, this is a simple bill. And especially for the new people, this is what you will hear. This is a simple bill, and it only has about 50 words. And the words are simple, and they say to schools, open. Stop having remote learning. And we just say, offer an in-person option. That's all the bill says. Some will say, this is a simple bill, and it's all about the kids. Now, what I'm going to suggest to you is that what they say is not incorrect. What I'm suggesting to you, Senate Bill 235 does not solve the problem. They will say it's all about the kids. Now, a side note, and again, I don't know what went on in the Senate, but I can tell you what went on in the House. The side note is that this bill was and is targeted to at least 2 school districts who are on paper still remote. That's Kansas City, Kansas, and Wichita. Now, I won't address I won't address Wichita. And I, in full disclosure, will tell you I'm on the school board at KCK. So I stand here in opposition of Senate Bill 235 and the target that was expressed because, among other reasons, and yes, it's a low-performing school. I rail against the scores daily, and I express that likewise in committee. But some will say, this is about the kids who are low-performing, at risk, low income, black, brown, poor white kids who are lagging in their learning. They've been out of school for a year. And I say, yes, they have been out of school for a year. They are low-performing. They were low-performing before the pandemic. Where were you then? Okay? They will say, these schools, like KCK, have received millions of dollars in federal money to help mitigate the COVID. And I'm not making this up. We need to take those hundreds of millions from KCK and Wichita and redirect them to Blue Valley, because they're open. You're still remote. Your teachers aren't teaching. And I thought, whoa, that took a lot of nerve. But it's true. They received millions of dollars, and when they sent the report of how they spent them, didn't take time to read it. Guess she wasn't interested. When the superintendent came to explain why, perhaps with the help of the health department, the positivity rate was up to 40% at times, comment was just excuses. You know, that's just what you do, the rate you test, those who test. We know that. But the county had issues, pandemic-related issues. Considered just an excuse. So Senate Bill 235 does not address those issues that were taken into consideration by the school district in saying, no, we can't reopen in January. We'll wait till April. But it's open now. It had been open for special ed kids from October, knowing they had to have those in-person services. But did you research that? No. It's kind of like knowledge and wisdom. You have the facts, but you don't have the insight. They will say that despite the fact that You know, they may not have an understanding of what's remote and what's virtual, but remote learning, yes. The kid is sitting there. We had testimony that the kids are feeling isolated. They have social emotional issues. They just don't want to stay remote anymore. That could be very correct. And that as we went through remote learning, we had counselors dealing with students from the porch. Did you research that? No. You're just going to say, Senate Bill 235, these schools need to be open. No more remote. However, that little caveat, option, an in-person option. So again, it's a smooth move, folks. All right? But again, let's go back to the learning lag. There is a learning lag. Now, I suggest some of our education members should get together and address the real issues. Senate Bill 235 does not address why is there learning lag? Why are there different learning styles? What's the matter with the teaching education programs that don't teach about dyslexia? I mean, there are a myriad of numbers of issues. 235 doesn't solve it. That's why I'm saying voting no. The word for the day, for me, this bill is myopic. It is defined as nearsightedness. An object in your eyeball, the fact that the school's not open, they're not learning, that's clear. You see that clearly. Cannot deny that. But what about the meaning? What about the perspective of what was going on in the district? What is going on in different districts? What about the districts who said in January, you know what's so funny? This is not funny. We have members laughing. These are students' lives that we are addressing. This is not a laughing matter. I'm asking for your attention, and I'm asking for your patience. And I'm asking that you use your intellectual insight to understand Senate Bill 235 does not get to the problem of low-performing, at-risk kids who, even those who are high-performing, suffering during remote learning. We get that. It's not funny. But you think it's funny? You think 235 works? You got it. Last but not least, I know you're ready for me to sit down, but I'm not ready yet. I ask you to vote no because the bill is not necessary. The schools are open. They got the message. Once this bill hit the news, the districts realized there's an attitude in this building. There's a hostility in this building when it comes to public education. We should be reforming instead of undermining. This bill is a power play. The same people in August who said the governor or the state board didn't have had the right. Local option. Now, these are the same people who are overriding that local option. There's a little caveat. Again, you put in an in-person option says, I don't overrule local control. But we know what it's about. We're not stupid. The proponents also say that, when it comes to, again, KCK, they did not have all of the facts, and when they got the facts, they ignored it. The point that districts are different, some, as I alluded to, offered a remote option in January that was supposed to permanently last. What do you do now? Senate Bill 235 will say you are in violation. Some of you have wisdom, some of you have just knowledge. I would ask that those who have wisdom vote Senate Bill 235 no, and go back to the education community in this body and say, let's look at the real reasons. Let's work on curriculum. Let's work on teacher education. Let's work on the things that we can work on. Let's work on the systemic racism that's in education. Some of you didn't even know what systemic meant. That's sad. We are knowledgeable, but we don't have the wisdom. Now, what is, again, ironic throughout all this, people don't care. There are some of us who don't care. I recognize it, I accept it, I go on to work for the education community and the education of our children, all of our children. I vote no on Senate Bill 235. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Speak to the bill. The chair recognizes Representative Humphreys.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with the representative that just spoke. This doesn't solve all the problems. Our priority, though, is that every child in Kansas has the option to return to full-time in-person school. And it gives parents an opportunity to decide what is the best thing for their children, in person or remote. And the particular aspect that I want to speak to is the inequality, the inequities of students who are only online and students who are able to be there in person. Are there positives for remote? Of course there are, and parents should be able to do that if they want to. But what are some of the things that don't happen when children are remote? First of all, maybe they don't get the free and reduced lunches that are available. Maybe they're not there, and the truancy rate has skyrocketed since we have been doing remote schools. They miss in-person interaction with teachers, that personal instruction. My daughter is a preschool teacher, and when she can't take her mask off and explain a sound to students, or she has to do it online, that's not as good for students who are trying to learn their sounds. What about the social interaction with peers? Online, that's a complete inequitable experience. How about eyes on the students? We need eyes on our students, and you all know what I'm talking about there. What about lack of adequate internet? What about lack of adequate number of computers because you're sharing your computer with your siblings, or maybe you're babysitting your siblings? So this bill doesn't solve everything, but it gives parents an opportunity to choose what is the best thing for them, what's the best thing for their students, because the parents know what they're missing by not being in person. So, body, I would urge you to vote yes on this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
To speak to the bill, the chair recognizes Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to address two important issues. One is adequacy and equity, and the other is local control. So I'd like to first ask the carrier of the bill a couple of quick questions. The first question is, were we able to financially satisfy the equity and adequacy with the Gannon court rulings?
Yes.
Is it fair to our students that some can go remote, some hybrid, and some in person? Is that fair when they don't have an option?
No.
All right, thank you. Body, we spend about $5.8 billion in our schools. We do all kinds of things to ensure that our buildings are funded. We spend over $200 million a year equalizing bond and interest payments for those buildings. We want all kids to have access to the best possible education, and right now Gallup poll says that 79% of all parents want their kids to be in person, for an in-person option. It's not fair that my 2 high school students have been going in person all year long, and other kids of the same age and other districts have been forced without an option, without an appeals process, to stay home in isolation. It is an equity issue. We want to make sure we're compliant with the Kansas Supreme Court and that we continue to provide equity and adequacy. They're both important. In terms of local control, think of it this way. When the governor closed schools, was that local control? When the governor decides to open schools, is that local control? When the governor delayed schools in August, was that local control? When the legislature appropriates suitable provision for finance and we require students to be in school for 1,116 hours, is that beyond our authority? We need to maintain some basic provisions. Local control has its place and always will, and we invite that and champion it, but there are basic provisions that we need to make sure every child has equity. And equity means they get to have the choice, the option of being in school. Please support this bill.
To speak to the bill, the chair recognizes Representative Helmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I speak from the heart of a retired counselor and one that still stays in touch with many of my students and my parents. I have, and I am still attending many funerals. A child just recently stood on an ice floe because there was no school to go to. The ice floe moved. They couldn't rescue him and he drowned. I've gone to 3 suicides of gun suicides because they were so frustrated. There were no more activities, and the children, high school students had and felt no hope, so killed themselves. I've gone to 2 drunken deaths of friends and students that I knew from elementary that were almost, I would deem them alcoholics now, because that's all there is to do now. You don't have to get up in the morning and go to school. There's no accountability anymore. And that's what one of the boys told me. All there is to do is party. There is no accountability for these children. You cannot make up when you're 19 what you've missed when you're 15 or 14 or 16. And that's what these children are telling me when I have the chance to visit with them. Imagine missing all of the exciting things that happen to you. Freshman corner, sophomore corner, junior corner, senior corner, turning rings, whatever it was in your school that was a tradition, and you don't have it because of the lockdowns. These children have had this stolen because we're making decisions that we're not going to have school for them, and they're going to sit in front of a computer and they have no social life. So, in other words, what they tell me is there's no hope. There's no hope. My grandson just turned 21, and he still runs around with a lot of kids from private schools and from public schools. And so they come out to the farm, they ride horses, they help me throw hay, they help me throw straw, and they tell me a lot of stories, and they tell me that they are so glad that they're not like their brothers and sisters, because their brothers and sisters have nothing, have nowhere to go, have no friends, have nothing to do, have no hope. They can't, I've asked them, what do their brothers and sisters do? They say nothing. Absolutely nothing. Nothing except what mom and dad can provide. Nothing. We can't allow that. That's within our grasp. Nothing causes suicide in a young person's life. Please don't allow this anymore. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
To speak to the bill, the chair recognizes Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in support of Senate Bill 235, and I want to take a second to explain why. So we've been told throughout this pandemic that we're supposed to follow the science. So from the Centers for Disease Control, this is what they have to say about schools and reopening schools. Based on the data, in-person learning in schools has not been associated with substantial community transmission. Although national COVID-19 case incidence rates among children and adolescents have risen over time, this trend parallels trends observed among adults. Increases in case incidence among school-aged children and school reopenings do not appear to predate increases in community transmission. So I cannot speak to why the representative from Kansas City, Kansas, or why the teachers unions don't want to reopen schools. I'm not going to assign motives, but I will tell you why I'm going to support this bill. I'm going to support this bill because this is about equal protection under the law. If you're an affluent family, you probably got a white-collar job, you can teach from home, you've got great internet, your kids are probably getting through this pandemic in some semblance of the same education that they get at home. But if you're not an affluent family, if you're one of the families in my neighborhood in Leavenworth, and you're a corrections officer, or you are a service worker, or you work in a factory, you can't stay home with your kids. So you either have to not be able to provide for your family, or you have to leave your kids at home unattended. And that's what's happening. And unattended kids are kids. They're not going to attend the classes. They're not going to get as good an education. I'm an educator. I teach at Wichita State University, and I teach some online, and I teach some in-person classes. And I'll just tell you, the learning online, no matter how hard the professor works, is not as good as the learning in person in a classroom. And the younger the student, the more pronounced that is. This is about equal protection under the law, and we need to stand with all kids. All kids deserve a good education, no matter how much their parents make. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The chair recognizes Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's interesting that we have heard from individuals today about suicide, which is a horrible issue, and it's been going up for years, not just the pandemic. We hear about those who are at home and say they have nothing to do. One of the things that the CDC prescribes is go outside for a while. Now, I know it's been raining, but we had some gorgeous 60 and 70 degree days where kids were out. We are now getting to a point, because of COVID vaccines, that people can get together more outside for Easter. That's been on the news for days. So are we making progress? Yes, we are. But this is about local control. And we all talk about it when we want it. And then we don't talk about it when we don't want it to play a part. That's politics. That's the shame of politics, really. That we don't carry through with it, and we don't come through with transparency. Our school districts today have the option, and they are using that model based on fact, based on scientific fact about whether COVID is going up or it's going down. Just recently, Missouri had been doing very well, and I heard this morning they are now going back up again. Did that happen from a crowd? Did it happen because of a holiday? Did it happen because of a parade? I don't know. But what we need to do is work together, and we need to let our school boards do their job. They are responsible, we are not. The Department of Education is responsible, we are not. And when we start infringing on those rights, we have overstepped our boundaries. Every child does deserve the opportunity to learn. Every child, no matter if they're disabled, no matter if they're geniuses, no matter if they're an average student. But I have also talked to several students, and I've seen reports from several that have actually enjoyed being at home doing their stuff. But that was a highly talented student. And I know that. So it was easier for her. But then there are others who say, I can't find anybody to play with. Who's not going outside? Who doesn't have a bike? Who can't go for a walk? Who can't go to the park? You can do that now. You just have to self-distance. Use common sense. And I'll tell you right now, you may not see a lot of COVID in younger children, but we're seeing it in older children. Look no farther than the NCAA. How many have had to drop out? How many teams aren't going? Why? Because of COVID. And they've been under a balloon. I mean, they've been kept safe in hotels where no one else is allowed except staff and administration, and yet it's appearing there. It knows no boundaries. And if you've ever seen a young child with COVID, it is not pretty. We've had babies from 3 months to 4 and 5 years old to 7 and 8 years old who have died from COVID because we do not know everything about it. It attacks different parts of the body, and it attacks for years to come. Your heart, your brain, your vital organs. And now we have a post-COVID issue because of those after effects on people that maybe you would least expect. And it can be in children, and it can be in adults. And when you have teachers standing in front of a class under the, not knowing who has been exposed, or if a coworker has been exposed, I'll tell you right now, we have teachers that won't come back to school. We are short on teachers. And why are we short on teachers? Because they're afraid of getting COVID. They're afraid in the classroom, if they get it, then they will take it home to their children. This is not a good bill. We can already do what's being prescribed. There are virtual models out there where you can be in school 3 days, out of school for 2 days. That is already there, but that needs to be left to your local health departments, to your school boards, and to the State Board of Education. Think about that, please. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
To speak to the bill, the chair recognizes Representative Zhu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Will the carrier of the bill yield to a question? So I don't sit on the relevant committee, so this is a genuine question that I have. Much of the rhetoric today has been about the pandemic, and I think that's a good and worthwhile conversation to have. But looking at the language of the bill, it goes far beyond this pandemic, right? So I guess my question is, in 3, 4, or 5 years, if this bill passes, what happens if, God forbid, a tornado comes through and destroys a school?
That's correct. And one of the issues that was asked of our reviser, snow days, still the same as it's always been. Boiler blows up in the basement, that school has to be closed. Those things are still provided for, and there are still exemptions that can be granted by the State Department of Education, as in the past, for emergencies on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you for that. So thinking this through, in the case of these, I guess I didn't get the answer. So what would the solution be? With this bill, they would be, in those emergencies, they would be allowed to not provide in person? Or would they still be required to if this bill passes?
It is my understanding that through an exemption, they can do an alternative. An example, Pleasant Ridge schools in the north side of our county in Leavenworth suffered a terrible flood from Stranger Creek. I think it's going to be 10, 11 years ago. Completely wiped out the elementary school there in Easton. And of course, there was no class for a time. They were able to make adjustments. They went to an old building, school went on. They added to their school year during the summer to get caught up. They adjusted on a basis. That school district handled it.
Thank you for that. I guess the important language in that explanation is the local school board handled it. I mean, from my perspective, I certainly think a pandemic is a reason to shut down a school. Temporarily, local school board decisions, certainly. I just think this really hamstrings a lot of different decisions. And when we have the technology available, in person is more important. I totally agree with that. But we have all the technology available to us nowadays in the case where a school is not available for in person, we have the option for remote. And I think we should take advantage of that in those dire circumstances. Thank you.
To speak to the bill, the chair recognizes Representative Wolf Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hesitated whether to speak about this bill, but I think underlying the reason for this bill is that some districts simply made the wrong decision. And I don't think that's the case, nor do I think this is a fairness issue. I think this was a public health issue. And because it is a public health issue, one size does not fit all for different school districts across the state. We heard that early on when the governor closed the schools. We said, well, the experience in western Kansas might have been very different than the experience in eastern Kansas, so why should we all shut down the schools? So I think this is a public health issue, and districts had to decide based on what the situation was in their particular district, what was the correct answer. Now let me give you a little bit of feel for what exactly. I live in the Piper School District. It abuts next to the KCK School District, and I have a portion of that in my district. But two districts are pretty different in terms of socioeconomic status and many other things. So let me just give you a feel for what the school board members, the administration might have been thinking during this time. So a few stats about the KCK School District. The average family income, is about $18,000. Depending on what zip code you're in that school district, 19 to 38% of the people may have insurance. So it's odds on you're not going to have insurance. You're living in a generational family, so your grandma and grandpa might be living with you or both. So you've not only got to worry about, the elderly family members that you can't, it's not as simple as not going and visiting grandma and grandma. They live with you. You've got people who work in those $18,000 a year jobs who are probably working in the service industry. So they can't Zoom from home like I could many times on my job. They had to go out every day. And those are also people that probably are one paycheck or two paychecks away from not being able to pay their rent or their house payment if they're lucky enough to own their home, and be out on the streets in some instances. So the decisions were much, much more difficult in those families than in the average school district. And I'll tell you what, we recognized that in Kansas City, Kansas, that the disease was so much more severe in those zip codes that we even prioritized those zip codes to give the first priority for some people to get the vaccination. There was a priority, once again, recognizing that even in our county, there were parts of it that were experiencing this disease much more seriously. One thing the New England Journal of Medicine says is that in order for schools to go back safely, there has to be some control on community spread. Our health department was doing yeoman's work, a fabulous job, but for many factors, it was out of control in certain parts of Wyandotte County. So I guess I don't judge my school district for what they did. I think they responded appropriately. I think everyone agrees that in-person learning is better. I don't think anyone doesn't agree with that. But they made a decision based on the factors in that particular school district that they thought was best for the health and welfare of those residents and those patrons in that school district, which was different than the school district that I reside in. So once again, not a fairness issue, it's a public health issue. COVID was a public and is a public health issue, and we have to look at public health measures to make the appropriate decisions. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time and listening. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
To speak to the bill, the chair recognizes Representative Chuck Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I'm a blessed man. My son lives in Los Angeles, and he brought his kindergartner to Pittsburgh to live with us because they were closing their schools in Los Angeles. And he's getting a great education. He's having a great experience. And, you know, he probably never would have known me if this hadn't happened. I'm just really glad he's in school because online just doesn't do it. And these kids need to be in school. And again, my son made the sacrifice to send his son to Kansas to make sure he doesn't fall behind. And also being a math teacher, I would hate to think for even an average student to take algebra, geometry, algebra 2 online. I don't think they can get it. I think teachers are a little more important than that. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Speak to the bill, the chair recognizes Representative Tarwater.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Body, I rise in support of SB 235. We've heard of a lot of excuses today on why schools aren't opening. They say we didn't have the facts or we don't have the facts still. We heard about positivity rates. We heard about government health officials suggesting they not open or that we stay home. We heard about unique situations that only affect certain districts, Kansas City, Kansas district. Truth is, this is just a bunch of excuses. And heck yes, the positivity rate's going to be through the roof when tests are short and you only test dead people and sick people. That's how you get a high positivity rate. When KU started back to school in the fall, they tested every student. That positivity rate was 3%, but nobody cares about that. They tested the entire population. That's the difference. The exact same data and positivity rate that applied to the schools in the Kansas City, Kansas School District also applied to the Catholic schools that are in the same neighborhoods, sometimes just down the street. There are 9 Catholic schools in Wyandotte County that were all open in August and have met every day, with the exception of a few days, with no issues. Same data points, same neighborhoods, living next to each other. Look, I get that we had to react immediately in March when this whole thing happened. And however, almost immediately, the science told us that it didn't affect the children. And soon thereafter, it was discovered that it was very difficult for our children to get the disease or transfer the disease either to each other or to adult teachers. Almost every single school has opened in the state of Kansas, so this bill doesn't really affect a whole lot of people. The only exceptions were in Johnson County and Sedgwick when we first opened in March. And I can tell you, I attended many back-to-school rallies where there were hundreds, if not thousands, of people. And I received well over 2,500 emails demanding that we do something up here to get their children back in school. The parents saw the data. The 2 districts that this affects received almost $200 million from the federal government for COVID-19. And they're the 2 school districts that still are not open. Now the 2 largest school districts and worst performing school districts are still on the sideline while all the children are being taught around them. It's no wonder that the private schools in these same districts are at least 3 times as successful as they are in the public schools. It's clear that that the Catholic schools care about the kids. These are numbers given us by the state. If you attend a private school in the KCK district, you are 3 times more likely to test at grade level. And this is a clear example of why. There's no greater treasure on earth than our children. And these parents are entrusting their greatest treasure to us, and we're letting them down. It's time that we strike our end of the bargain. No more excuses. These local school boards have let these children down, and now it's up to us to help them out. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
To speak to the bill, the chair recognizes Representative Wynn for the second time.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and no doubt you know I had to respond. You are comparing Catholic schools with maybe 200 students in a school, maybe living in the same parish, testing, and the data the previous speaker loves to refer to as, I think, 3rd grade math or 3rd grade English. So you're comparing 30 kids to, you got 22,000 in the district. And the premise is that I heard, and I could be wrong, and would love to be corrected, that the school district for the public schools didn't care enough about the kids, but the Catholic schools are doing the caring bit. I go back to knowledge and wisdom. You may know some facts, but you have no clue on what is going on, the perspective, the surrounding, the environment. But, you know, we pick and choose, and you accept what you want to accept. But to stand up here and say that the local school district, of which there are 4 school boards, that from time to time in other school districts in our county quarantine in and out. But just again, you may have some knowledge of some facts, but you don't have the wisdom that it takes to make a insightful and intelligent assessment. So thank you, Mr. Chair, and you all have a great day.
To speak to the bill, the chair recognizes Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will address this not by what I've heard before, but again, in terms of the makeup of the Kansas State Board of Education. We have 10 elected members representing a district comprised of 4 contiguous senatorial districts. That means that these State Board of members represent a large population. Having served on the school board in Lawrence for 8 years, one of the things I was reminded of is school board had its business, our county commission had their business, our city commission had their business, state legislators had theirs, and federal folks had theirs as well. I would argue that with the 10 elected members, they are representing their districts. Very large. And for us to decide that as a legislature, we know best, we know better than the state board, I would say, is short-sighted. State board members were elected the same way we get here. They're elected by the people in their district. In fact, some of the same people elect us. And I would say, do we not trust the voters? Because in my district, some of the same people who elect my school board on the state also elect those of us that represent the legislature. I would hope we have respect for the rest of the elected officials, that we trust their judgment, that we don't know best, that we know what they should have been doing. During this pandemic, people had a hard time knowing what to do, let alone what was best to do. I would say maybe we should stay in our own lane. Maybe we should respect the other elected officials. I would ask you to think about that. I'm opposed to SB 235.
Does anyone else wish to speak to Senate Bill 235? Seeing none, Representative Johnson, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I thank everyone who has been up here and has shared, because you are caring, loving people. I want you to understand that I am a product of Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas schools. I'm very proud of it. All my family went there. My dad taught there. 2 of my sisters taught there and still do as substitutes. My cousin was the first white teacher to go to Sumner Academy. I love those kids. I checked on my niece, who is a special ed student in Kansas City, Kansas. She needs to be back more than she has. I've been checking on my people, my friends. I live there, I know them. It's a little different than how I had planned to end this, but I want to share one comment that I got from my grandmother. She was a wonderful Swedish woman, Swedish American. She helped teach me Swedish when I was little in the home. And she bandaged me up every time I got cut on that little farm outside of Osage City. And that was quite often. She would pull out the most deadly medicine I have ever had to deal with called mercurochrome, and she would take a little dauber and she would put that on my cut, and I would dance and jump because it just burned. And any of you youngsters in this building today, you missed out on a real treat with mercurochrome. It's now illegal in the United States, but it would kill germs. Then Grandma would wrap me up in Band-Aids, and I don't know what she put. Maybe it was an early version of Gorilla Glue on those Band-Aids. And then the fateful day when it was time to take the Band-Aid off, I'd always plead, more, no. Go slow. No. If I go slow, it's gonna hurt more. You need to rip it off. Oh, no. You know what she did? And there it was. And then I'd get a cookie, and you know what? The hurt went away. Separate is not equal. Thurgood Marshall here in Topeka did that case. I've studied that case. Family living in Topeka. One of my paras was friends with one of the attorneys. Separate but not equal. And that's what we have here today. I love those kids in Wyandotte County, and I want them to have equal. With that, Mr. Chair, I move that when the committee rises and reports, it reports Senate Bill 235 favorably for passage. Thank you.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. Next item of business is House Bill 2287. For the purpose of carrying House Bill 2287, the chair recognizes Representative Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There were no committee amendments.
You may proceed.
HB 2287 comes to us from the Commerce Committee and is an act that creates the Kansas Promise Scholarship. With the emphasis placed on four-year degrees and four-year scholarships, many have lost sight that a career in technical and skilled trades can be challenging and rewarding. This bill is a step toward restoring balance and incenting students to pursue a career path in skilled and technical trades. This bill provides scholarships for up to 2 years to attend eligible post-secondary educational institutions in an associate degree program or career and technical education program. Graduates must work in Kansas 2 consecutive years following the program. The bill is more than just a scholarship program. It represents an important component towards workforce development and the recovery of our economy. We heard testimony in our committee from employers stating how hard it is to hire skilled labor. So this bill targets workforce development by providing scholarships to students who must enter one of the top 10 job fields or career pathways that currently have the highest need for skilled employees in Kansas. The Board of Regents will annually collaborate with the Department of Commerce and Kansas business and industry to designate these top 10 scholarship eligible job fields and career paths. The Board of Regents will also annually evaluate the program and submit a report to the House and Senate Committees on Education. Total appropriations for this program could not exceed $10 million in any fiscal year. Scholarships can only be awarded after applicants have applied for federal grants and federal student aid. This program is set to end on July 1st, 2026. The Board of Regents indicates the bill would increase annual expenditures in a fiscal note of $65,000 for salaries and wages and other operating expenses. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'm prepared to stand for questions.
To speak to the bill, the chair recognizes Representative Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The previous speaker did a good job explaining the legislation. I urge your support. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Does anyone else wish to speak to the bill? Seeing no one, Representative, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move when the committee rises and reports it report HB 2287 favorably for passage.
You've heard the motion by Representative Long to report House Bill 2287 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. Motion passes. Next item of business is House Bill 2219. For the purposes of carrying House Bill 2219, the chair recognizes Representative Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There were no committee amendments.
Please continue.
Colleagues, House Bill 2219 would create the Kansas Targeted Employment Act. Essentially, what we hope to do with that is to establish a tax credit for businesses that employ individuals with developmental disabilities. This would run for tax years 2021 through 2026. In essence, for every hour work provided by an eligible individual, the qualified business would earn a tax credit equal to 50% of the wages paid, and it could not exceed $7.50 per hour. The annual total of tax credits would be capped at $5 million for the entire program. The tax credit is non-refundable, cannot be carried forward, and then the bill requires the KDAD secretary to annually report to the respective House and Senate Commerce Committees as an analysis as to the effectiveness of the program. The bill would take effect on publication in the statute book, and it's going to sunset on January 1, 2027. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would be happy to stand for questions.
To speak to the bill, the chair recognizes Representative Clayton.
Why, thank you, Mr. Chair. The carrier of the bill did almost as good of a job as the last carrier, but not quite. No, but honestly, I do urge your support, and thank you all so much. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anyone else wish to speak to House Bill 2219? If there is no further discussion, Representative Mason, you may close.
Thank you for those kind words, Smith. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Oh, wait a minute.
Oh. Excuse me, the chair recognizes Representative Reese. Susan Reese, sorry.
Mr. Chair, I have some questions for the carrier of the bill.
Of course.
Does this bill make any changes to the sub-minimum wage for those working in shelter workshops?
It does not.
I couldn't hear you, sorry.
It does not.
Can you explain the reasons for it not affecting that?
I may have to defer to the chairman of the Commerce Committee, but most of these workshops are working under Federal Department of Labor guidelines where they cannot pay sub-minimum wages.
Okay. Kansas would have their own.
I'm sorry, I cannot hear you.
Kansas would have their own statute regarding that.
I'm sorry, Representative, I still cannot hear you.
Kansas would have their own statute regarding wages that are paid for those that are working like in shelter workshops.
Okay. This has nothing to do with minimum wage whatsoever. This is just a tax credit for those companies who hire individuals with disability into their fully integrated workplace.
Is there anything in the bill that talks about or requiring these companies to pay at least the minimum wage?
I do not
The
believe
Kansas minimum wage?
I do not believe so.
There's nothing in the bill that says that.
I'm sorry, Representative. There is a section in the bill that indicates that one of these qualified employers must pay at least minimum wage, whatever that is, for them to qualify for this.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Does anyone else wish to speak to the bill? All right. Now, Representative Mason, you may close.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move that when the committee rises and reports, that we would report House Bill 2219 favorable for passage.
You've heard the motion by Representative Mason to report House Bill 2219 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. This concludes our general orders. The chair recognizes Majority Leader Hawkins.
Report.
You almost heard the motion. You've heard the motion to rise and report. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion passes.
The clerk will read the committee report.
Speaker, your committee of the whole recommends House Bills 2287, 2219, and Senate Bill 235 be passed.
Speaker recognizes Representative Garber.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the adoption of the committee of the whole report.
You've heard the motion to adopt the committee report. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The committee report is adopted. Reports of standing committees, the clerk will read.
Committee on Financial Institutions and Rural Development recommends House Bill 2236 be amended. The bill be passed as amended. Committee on Federal and State Affairs recommends House Concurrent Resolution 5013 be adopted. Committee on Federal and State Affairs recommends House Bill 2415 be amended. The bill be passed as amended. Committee on Federal and State Affairs recommends House Bill 2089 be amended by substituting a new bill to be designated as substitute for House Bill number 2089 as follows: an act concerning education relating to firearms, standardizing firearm safety education training programs in school districts, establishing the Royale Act, and the substitute bill be passed. Committee on Health and Human Services recommends Senate Bill 77 be amended. The bill be passed as amended.
Are there announcements? Representative Vaughn replaced Representative Woodard on House Taxation Committee today, March 15th only. Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Body, I'd like to bring your attention to the invitation laying upon your desk that today there will be a presentation, lunch and learn upon the federal relief bill given to us by KLRD staff, sponsored by the Greater Kansas City Building Trades Council, and hosted by Sheet Metal 2. Join us upon adjournment if you can. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Woodard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Democrats, we will have agenda tomorrow morning at 8:30 a.m. Again, agenda at 8:30 a.m. via Zoom. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any further announcements? Majority Leader Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Republicans, we will have calendar tomorrow morning at 8:30 via WebEx. Mr. Speaker, I move the House adjourn until Tuesday, March 16th at 11 a.m.
You've heard the motion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. We are adjourned.